Hi, I'm Adrian Ong. Okay, and let's continue with part 2. Okay, so previously we have covered part 1 about the patriarchs and Moses, remember? Okay, and Abraham is about 2000 BC and Moses 1500. Okay, and now we are going to the part 2, the kings section, okay, from 1000 BC onwards. So just a recap. Okay, still remember we covered the 5 books of Moses here. Okay, covered the story of Adam all the way to Moses, and then we ended up here Deuteronomy, okay, just before they enter. And now we are going to continue with that story, okay, and see how the Israelites enter. Okay, so this is the place, okay, the focus of our this video now. Okay, the second part of history. Okay, and now, okay, so this is a zoom in of that section just now. Okay, so before that, still remember in the 5 books, right, you have Egypt. They coming out of Egypt, remember God need to punish them for 40 years, so that's why in 40 years they spend in the wilderness. Okay, and going up here, and then just before they enter, and then the books of Moses ends here, remember, ends with the book of Deuteronomy, where God gave them the law a second time to remind them, because it's a whole new generation. Remember, the 600,000 have perished in the wilderness. Okay, so after 40 years, now finally, okay, they are going into the promised land. So they enter the promised land, okay, by the leadership of Joshua. Okay, so here where you have the book of Joshua. Then what happened after that? Okay, in the time of Joshua, of course, they are still okay, still obeying the commandments generally, but after that, then it start to deteriorate. Okay, so at first, right, the leadership is under judges. Okay, they are called judge, not kings. Okay, they are called judge. So these are the leaders of the people. They don't operate like kings. Okay, but what they do is normally they would fight wars. Okay, if there are other nations, okay, that cause trouble to them, then they would lead the people to fight against other nation. Okay, or they would judge if there are any matters, okay, any disputes within their own people. Okay, so that is the function of judges. uh so okay, judge. And in that, right, you have some famous judges. Okay, their story like Gideon or Samson. Okay. Okay, and then, okay, at that period of time, you also have this book of Ruth. Okay, it's also in the period of Judges. It's a short book. Okay, Ruth is, why the book of Ruth is there, right, is to show us the line of David. Okay, so Ruth is David great grandmother. Okay, so that's why it's there to show, okay, to pave the way, for to prepare the way, okay, for David. Okay, so wonderful story also. Then after that we have the period of kings. Okay, after the judges. Okay, during the judges, right, there was no king in Israel. Okay, and people did what was evil on their people did what was good in their own eyes. Okay, so they just do what they think is right. Okay, but it was all evil in God's sight. Okay, and then they asked for a king, and then God gave them a king. Okay, and the first king is Saul. Okay, so in the book of Samuel and Kings, right, we have the kings period. Okay, all the kings there. Okay, kings. Okay, and we have the first king, Saul. Okay, and mainly the story of Saul, right, is recorded in the book of First Samuel. Then after that we have the second king. Okay, God rejected Saul. Okay, and we have the second king, David. Okay, remember the shepherd boy David. Okay, so we have the story of David here in Second Samuel. Okay, and in First Kings, David passed on to Solomon, and then Solomon passed on to Rehoboam, his son, and Jeroboam is not his son. Okay, so the royal line is to Rehoboam, but not Jeroboam. Later we will go further. So in First Kings, right, the kingdom divided into two. Okay, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And in Second Kings, we have the last kings, and in the end, they were taken away. Okay, they were brought away by other nations. Okay, the northern kingdom by Assyria, and the southern kingdom by Babylon. Later we would see. Okay, so we have the exile. Okay, so far okay. So just a brief summary. Okay, the book of Moses ends here, and then Joshua led them into the promised land, and then first they have the period of judges, and then they asked for kings, so God gave them kings. Okay, and we have these books here. covering the king period, and in the end, okay, they were taken into exile. Okay, so let's go slightly a bit more, right, deeper. So this is the kingdom of David. Okay, at that time we have the first king Saul. Okay, then after that we have David at the second king. Then after that we have David's son, Solomon. Okay, so at this time, right, it is still a united kingdom, meaning one kingdom. The whole kingdom of Israel, right, is under one king, Saul, only king. Okay, only after Saul, David became king, and only after David, Solomon became king, and they rule over the whole nation of Israel. But after Solomon died, right, then the kingdom was divided into two. Okay, so we have the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Okay, where we have the divided kingdom. So the northern kingdom is called Israel, okay, because they are the larger one probably, and the southern kingdom is called Judah, okay, because there are only two tribes here. Remember, there are 12 tribes. Okay, so they are divided here into 10 tribes. Okay, so Solomon, okay, under Jeroboam is divided into 10 tribes. Okay, here 10, remember there are 12 tribes originally, right? And then 10 tribes now is in the north, and in the south under Rehoboam, okay, there are two tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Judah is the larger tribe, Benjamin is a very small tribe, so that's why they take the name of Judah probably. And so we have now the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay, this you need to be very clear, because after that when we go to the section of prophets, right, we have prophets to Israel and we have prophets to Judah. Okay, so you need to be very clear about this. And so the first king of the divided, so we call this the divided kingdom, right? And Jeroboam became king of these 10 tribes, the first king, and after that there are many kings also, and the first king is Rehoboam. And I want you to note that Rehoboam is Solomon's son. So the royal line, right, is inherited through Rehoboam, okay, and all the way later on to Zerubbabel and to Zerubbabel and to Jesus. Okay, so it's the southern kingdom of Judah where Jerusalem is. Okay, it's where the royal line goes, not the northern part. Okay, keep in mind. Okay, so both Israel and Judah were very evil at that time. Okay, they sacrificed their own sons even, and they worship idols in all the high places, all the high mountains. They built altars, Baal, okay, the god other than God. So that's why God is very angry with them, and in the end, God need to put them into exile. Okay, meaning let other nation take over. Okay, to conquer them and take them into other places. So in this United Kingdom, we have the book of First Samuel, Second Samuel, and First Kings covering this period. Because remember, First Samuel mainly about the story of Saul, and Second Samuel the story of David. First Kings story of Solomon, and in First Kings you have the division. Okay, mm, the division of the kingdom into northern and southern in the book of First Kings. So we continue from the book of First Kings here. You have the two kingdoms, divided kingdom, Israel and Judah, and then all the way until Second Kings, then you would see the exile. Okay, the northern kingdom of Israel taken away by Assyria, and the southern kingdom of Judah taken away by Babylon. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. So remember, this is the uh, region, okay, the land of Canaan, or the land of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, okay, where God, under the leadership of Joshua, at first they entered, then they have judges and they have kings, remember? Then in the end, right, okay, at in the end, right, the northern kingdom of Israel, okay, is taken by Assyria, taken exile, okay, taken into exile, meaning they bring these Israelites, okay, out of their own land, okay, to work for them in Assyria. Okay, and this happens in 722 BC. Okay, there are two exiles, two stages actually, one before this and the final one is this one, and this is an important date, okay, that you need to note. in order to study Old Testament history. And then at this year 722 BC, Assyria was the uh, one of the strongest nation at that time. Okay, Babylon was not yet. Okay, so that's why it's Assyria that conquers the northern kingdom of Israel. He almost conquered southern kingdom as well. Okay, but didn't manage to. So that though Judah continued to remain as a nation, okay, until the year of 605 BC. Okay, the Babylon came and took them into exile. Okay, and this exile, right, took place in 3 stages. Okay, and I want you to roughly know the dates. In the first exile in 605 BC, okay, at that time Babylon is the main power here. Okay, Assyria has been conquered, okay, by Babylon. So Babylon took the southern kingdom of Judah into exile. Okay, the first wave, okay, or the first trip is 605 BC, where Daniel was taken into Babylon. Okay, and in 597 BC we have the second exile, where it's second stage. Okay, where Ezekiel is taken. Okay, one of those taken. And then every time they take these people there, right, they leave only the poorest people back in Judah. Okay, and in 586 BC, this is a very important date. Okay, it's where the whole city of Jerusalem is burned down. Okay, their walls, everything destroyed. Okay, in 586 BC, this is the total destruction of Jerusalem and Judah. And then most of them are taken into exile, but there is a remnant. Okay, here. uh, and there's actually a small fourth exile only mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, but I'm not going to cover it here, okay, to make things complicated. So uh, so so I just put 3 here. Okay, and in 586 BC, this is a big date, okay, big one that you really need to remember. So the end of the northern kingdom of Israel, it's in 722 BC, and for the southern kingdom of Judah, it's 586 BC. We have the total destruction. Okay, but it occurs in stages. So in the first stage, right, they already taken the first trip of exile, okay, in 605 BC. And I want you to note this 605 BC as well, because from this year onwards, right, 70 years after that, right, the people would be returning from the exile, okay, back to the land of Judah, back to Jerusalem. Okay, 70 years counting from this year, so that's why this is very important. The 70 years is mentioned in several books of the prophets, for example Daniel, Jeremiah. Okay, God said, I would give this land rest for 70 years. Okay, you would be exiled to Babylon, but after that 70 years you will be brought back, okay, to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. Okay, so this 605 is important as well. Okay, and of course this is covered in the book of Second Kings. Okay, the end of the period of kings. Okay, and what about First and Second Chronicles? If you look at your index in front of your Bible, okay, straight away after Second Kings you have First and Second Chronicles. And if you have read, maybe you would think that it's very similar to the books of Samuel's and Kings. Okay, but actually it's not so. There are differences. And what I want to say here, right, is you can see First and Second Chronicles as summing up, okay, a sum up of the history from Adam to the exile. Okay, meaning from the book of Genesis all the way to Second Kings. So it's like a conclusion, okay, or a sum up of the history all the way from Adam. You look at First Chronicles chapter 1, then you can see Adam. Okay, so this is one of the purpose of First and Second Chronicles. You can treat it as a sum up of the history from Adam to the exile. Okay, then now we are going to cover part 3, okay, which is the return from exile. I want to remind you, remember, okay, we just covered where you have 722 BC taken by Assyria into exile, and 605 BC taken by the Babylon into exile, okay, and the total destruction happens in 586 BC. And from this date, remember, there will be 70 years, okay, here in Babylon before they return back to their own land. Okay, so after that 70 years, okay, so there's a return from Babylon, okay, or from other parts where they are placed in, where they are exiled. Okay, and exiled means, right, the people are taken away from their own land to stay in a foreign land, okay, in other nations' land. So now they are taken back. Okay, why? Under the empire, under the Persian empire, okay, King Cyrus. Okay, because before that they were under the Babylonians, remember? Okay, and only in 539 BC, right, Cyrus managed to defeat, okay, Babylon. Okay, so once the Babylon empire has ended, okay, and now it's the Persian empire. Okay, God has been gracious to uh, the Israelites, Cyrus also. Then Cyrus give a green light to them to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their city. So in the following year, after Cyrus conquered Babylon, okay, in 538 BC, they were allowed to return, and they returned under this person called Zerubbabel. Okay, this is very significant. Remember, from 2000 BC we have Abraham, 1500 BC we have Moses, 1000 BC we have David, okay, the kings, and then 500 BC we have Zerubbabel. Okay, this is the Zerubbabel that I mentioned previously. Okay, this Zerubbabel is the leader, okay, of those, he is from the royal line, you know, all the way from David, Solomon, Rehoboam, southern kingdom of Judah, remember, and all the way. Okay, so one of the kings called Zechariah or Jehoiachin, okay, is taken away by the Babylonian king to exile. Okay, and from there we have Zerubbabel, okay, which is Jeconiah's grandson. Okay, so, or Jehoiachin's grandson. So the son is Shealtiel. So after Shealtiel we have Zerubbabel. So under Zerubbabel, the people, some of them came back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city and the walls. Okay, so among them also Joshua the high priest. Okay, Zerubbabel is the leader. Okay, but Joshua is also the leader. Joshua is the high priest. In the book of Zechariah, right, God asked the what do you call that? The crown, okay, to be put on Joshua's head. Okay, so from Joshua is the leader of the small nation of Israel. At that time, they are not a free nation yet. Okay, they are still under Cyrus, under the Persian Empire, but they are given the freedom just to be there to rebuild their city and to their temple. Okay, so under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Joshua, okay, the people, the exiles, the Israelites who are outside their country, okay, go back to their country, to their land, to rebuild the temple, okay, in 538 BC. And then just like just now, right, the exiles are taken by 3 or 4 waves, right? This one, when they return also, okay, it's by 3 waves. 538 BC, 538 BC, if you calculate, right, from before that, remember, 605 BC, so it's roughly 70 years period. Okay, the period of year that God promised that they would be in exile here for 70 years. Okay, and then they will return, and it happened. So in 538 BC, under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Joshua, they came back to rebuild the temple, but it was not that smooth. Okay, they gave up after a while. Okay, but after that, in about 458 BC, the second wave came under Ezra. Okay, what Ezra did is mainly to re-establish the law, because the kings of Israel, right, or Judah, right, has been so evil, right, that all the festivals has not been kept. Most of the festivals has not been kept, and they are very evil. They worship idols and they do not put God first, all those kind of things. So that's why Ezra need to come back to re-establish the law in 458 BC, and a few years after that Nehemiah came back, okay, to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. Remember, all the walls have been burned down in 586 BC. Okay, so now Nehemiah's job is to come back and to rebuild the wall. Okay, and of course a few person came back with him to here. Okay, so there are 3 waves here. So where do we get this account, right? It's through the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay, that's why maybe we don't notice Zerubbabel, because he's not a book. Okay, but he is important because it's from him Jesus comes. Okay, and then between this period, right, you have the story of Esther here in Babylon. Okay, so that's why you need to know, okay, the setting of the book. Okay, this is what I'm emphasizing. God gave us 66 books, and each book has its different story, different setting, different background. Okay, so Esther is set in Babylon, okay, not in Jerusalem. Okay, set in Babylon, and that time it's under the rule of the Persian Empire. Okay, not Cyrus. Okay, it's another king called Ahasuerus. Okay, so the Esther, the setting is in here, and there also we have one prophet books, Daniel. Also, it's about the story in the 70 years, okay, that they are in exile in Babylon. So we have Daniel, the book of Daniel also here. Okay, so far, is it clear to you? Okay, so let's just do a quick recap. So long, right? Okay, so we have completed the 3 parts. Okay, so this is part 1, remember, where we have the patriarchs and Moses. Okay, 5 books of Moses, where Moses came from Ur to Haran, then after that to the promised land. Okay, but not given yet. You remember Genesis, and Abraham, we have his son Isaac, grandson Jacob, and the 12 tribes, and in the end they end up in Egypt, remember, with Joseph. And then Moses after that took them out, the Exodus, and then at Mount Sinai they were given the law. Then in Numbers, they made a journey up here. Okay, remember the 40 years period in the wilderness. And then the book of Moses ends with the book of Deuteronomy, just before they enter, where God gave them the law again. Okay, remind them before they enter. And then who brought them in? Do you remember who brought them in? Okay, yes, so Joshua brought them in. And then we have 2 periods. First is the period of who is the ruler? Judges, remember? We have judges. And then we have the period of kings. Okay, so this when the period of kings start, it's about 1000 BC. Okay, and who are the kings? Do you still remember? Yes, Saul, first king, David, the second king, and Solomon, the third king. And after that, what happened? Yes, divided kingdom. Remember, under Solomon it's still United Kingdom, but after that it's divided into the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, the king is Jeroboam, and the southern kingdom of Judah, and the king is Rehoboam. And which one is Solomon's son? Rehoboam. Okay, from here the royal line comes all the way to Zerubbabel later and to Jesus. Okay, and in the book of Second Kings we have the exile. Okay, 2 exiles, one. Okay, here. Yeah, okay. So the divided kingdom here, Jeroboam, 10 tribes and 2 tribes. Judah and Benjamin is here. Okay, and the 10 tribes, it's in the north. Okay, and then here is the royal line, remember, Rehoboam. And then they are taken into exile 722 BC by Assyria, and 586 BC, the total destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. But I want you to remember this date. Why? 605 BC, because it's from there, okay, starts the 70-year period in exile. And after the 70 period, what happens? They come back. Okay, so after the 70 years period, in 538 BC, roughly, okay, they came back under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Joshua, okay, to rebuild the temple. And after that, 458 BC, Ezra came back to re-establish the law, and Nehemiah came back to rebuild the wall in 445 BC. And the book of Esther is between this period, okay, Daniel as well, in the 70-year period, and the setting is in Babylon. Okay, so that is briefly the history, the overview of history. Okay, so we have part 1, the patriarchs and Moses. Okay, so we covered the 5 books, the foundation of the whole Old Testament and the whole Bible. Remember, the 5 books of Moses, from Genesis to Deuteronomy in part 1. Okay, in Deuteronomy they didn't manage to enter yet. Okay, just before they enter. And in part 2 we have Joshua, leading them to enter, and we have the period of judges and kings. Okay, so the part 2 mainly is the period of kings all the way till the exile, and part 3 we have them returning from the exile. Okay, and the books that covered are Ezra and Esther. So this is the history, and the history is very important and central to the Old Testament. Okay, because everything builds up on that. You would see later the wisdom and poetry builds up on that, and the prophets, all of them build up on this, especially in the kings and part 2 and part 3 of history. So if you are not firm or not good in this history, right, and when you study the book of Isaiah, for example, or Jeremiah, right, you just can't really appreciate that book, because you don't know in which context, under which kings, and what is happening in Israel during that time the prophets are prophesying. Okay, so that's why you need to know very well, okay, regarding the history. And also the New Testament also frequently quotes the Old Testament history, especially during the time of Moses, the Exodus, okay, or during Genesis, people like Joseph, Jacob, Abraham, okay, frequently quoted. So that's why the history is very important, and I would say is the foundation, okay, of the whole Old Testament as well. So if you want to start studying the Old Testament, right, it would definitely be good to start with history first before you even attempt any of the prophets. Okay. Okay, just a really quick summary of what we have discussed so far. Okay, so part 1, we have the patriarchs and Moses, remember? From Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They ended up in Egypt. After that, Moses took them out, Exodus. Okay, and then they came back here at the border, but didn't manage to enter. But it is under part 2. Under who? Under Joshua. They entered there, and then they have the periods of judges, and then kings. And then what happened? Taken into exile to Assyria and Babylon. For how many years? Yes, for 70 years, remember? From 605 BC, okay? 70 years. In the year of 538, when Cyrus, okay, the Persian, has defeated Babylon, then they were allowed to come back to do what? Okay, so under part 3, they were allowed to come back to, under who? Under who? Under Zerubbabel and Joshua. Okay, remember, Joshua is both of them are leaders actually, but the authority is under Joshua, okay, because in the book of Zechariah it's mentioned that the crown is to be put on the head of Joshua. Okay, so from that on we have high priest all the way till the high priest in the New Testament, Caiaphas, okay, before under which uh, Jesus was accused, okay, and received his death sentence. Okay, so in part 3 they came back from the exile, okay, and they came back to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, rebuild the walls, and Ezra came back to re-establish the law, remember? Okay, so that's in a nutshell the whole history of the Old Testament. Okay, and by this time it's already about 400 BC, remember? When we start with Adam, it's in the Garden of Eden. Okay, the Garden of Eden is somewhere here or here. Okay, it's 4000 BC. So here we have covered about 4000 years of history, okay, without counting the creation yet. Okay, so now we are already at 400. So actually we have covered the whole Old Testament history. Okay, the whole Old Testament history, and later what we are going to do is just to look where the wisdom and poetry fits in this history, okay, and also where the prophets fits in, okay, in this whole history. So we have covered the whole time period actually of the Old Testament. Okay, so these are the Old Testament books: history, wisdom and poetry, and prophecy. And now that we have finished the history section, right, I want you to know that we can divide the history section into two. One is the law, the distinct section, remember, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, also called the Pentateuch, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Okay, this is foundation to the whole Old Testament and also to the whole Bible. And then we have others, okay, covering part 2 and part 3 of history. Joshua going into Canaan, okay, the promised land, and God gave them the land all the way to the exile, and then coming back from Babylon and Assyria to rebuild the temple, rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And then we end there. And I say that the book of the history section is the foundation, okay, to the whole Old Testament. Later we would see how the wisdom and poetry and prophecy fits in, okay, in which part of history. So we would just end here, and we would continue with the section of wisdom and poetry and also prophecy in the next video. Okay, that's it. Thank you. If you have any question, you can email me at guitarboy9814@gmail.com. Okay. Thank you, and hope it has been a wonderful time to you. Okay, something beneficial for you.